Hey guys, tonight we are taking you somewhere dimly lit, vaguely drafty, and very functional. That's right, into the cold stone bedrooms of medieval Europe, where your comfort depends on a humble ceramic vessel, the chamber pot. And honestly, if you don't learn the quiet rules of using it, you might not survive your first night without either embarrassing yourself or upsetting someone with more power than you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you do, drop a comment telling me your city and the exact time you're listening. I love imagining where everyone is tuning in from. Maybe you're in a warm apartment at noon, or curled under blankets at 2 a.m. somewhere snowy. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're lying under thick wool blankets, the kind that smell faintly of lanolin, and the air in the room is heavy with the scent of smoke from the downstairs hearth. The walls are stone cold, even in summer on tonight. A late frost has slipped in through the shutters. You blink in the darkness and realize nature is calling. The idea of putting on 3 layers of clothing and stepping outside into the icy courtyard is about as appealing as being volunteered for leech therapy. So your hand reaches under the bed, fingers brushing against the rounded side of a ceramic pot. Smooth, cool, and if you're lucky, empty. This is not just any container. This is the medieval night's greatest convenience. The silent hero of the no plumbing era. You carefully slide it closer, mindful of the other bodies in the room. Guest houses and noble halls alike often had shared sleeping spaces, and waking someone up for the wrong reasons could earn you some side-eye at breakfast. The thing is, there's an unspoken code here. You don't slam the pot down on the floor. You don't shuffle noisily on the boards. And above all, you don't make eye contact with anyone if they're unlucky enough to be awake. Medieval life valued privacy, or at least the illusion of it. People might share a bed for warmth, but your pot moments were considered a strictly unspoken affair. It's funny, historians still debate whether chamber pots were kept on the same side of the bed for everyone, or if it was a personal choice. Some records suggest the left side was proper, because right hands were reserved for more public tasks like greeting and eating. Others think the positioning was just a matter of convenience and available space. Either way, the rule is simple. You remembered where it was before nightfall, because searching for it in the dark was a gamble you didn't want to lose. You gripped the handle, feeling the weight of centuries of necessity and mild awkwardness. Outside, the wind howls around the corners of the building. Inside, there's just you, the pot, and the unspoken etiquette of medieval midnight. You wake the next morning to the slow creak of timber beams above you, the kind that seem to sigh along with the building. Sunlight slips in through a narrow slit of a window, but it's weak and watery, barely cutting through the chill that still lingers in the air. Somewhere downstairs, bread is being sliced, and you can hear the muffled hum of voices preparing for the day. Before you so much as swing your legs out of bed, you glance at the nightstand, or rather, the simple wooden stool where the chamber pot Saturday just hours before. Its presence is a quiet reminder that last night went smoothly, at least by medieval standards. But here's where the rules get a little more social. Privacy, medieval style, isn't what you're used to. The walls might be thick, but the concept of personal space was practically non-existent. Entire families, servants, and sometimes unexpected guests might share a sleeping chamber, each with their own small sphere of belongings, and if they were lucky, a personal pot. But here's the catch. Using it wasn't just about answering nature's call. It was also about how you went about it, without stepping on the unspoken etiquette. Rule 1. Never interrupt someone else's turn. If you shared a pot, which, yes, was a thing, you waited until the user was done, even if the wait felt longer than a sermon on a rainy Sunday. Rule 2. No commentary. Not on the timing, not on the sound, not on anything. Pretend nothing happened. Rule 3. You always put it back exactly where you found it, handle facing outward. It wasn't just for convenience. In the dark, muscle memory kept accidents from happening. Some travelers wrote about these customs in letters home, noting how even in bustling inns, everyone seemed to silently coordinate their nocturnal routines. Historians still argue whether this was a learned tradition, passed down in households, or just common sense developed over time. There's no surviving medieval chamber pot etiquette manual, though honestly, I'd read the entire thing if it existed. As you lie there, the fire downstairs finally begins to heat the air above, and you think about how strange it is that such a simple object could carry so much quiet choreography. And yet, it makes perfect sense. In a world without plumbing, privacy wasn't a physical condition, it was a mutual agreement. You gave it, you received it, and no one spoke a word. You push the blanket aside and sit up, the chill instantly brushing against your skin. Your feet find the wooden floorboards, and you carefully skirt around where the pot is placed. It's not just courtesy, it's survival. No one wants to be the person who tips it over. Not now, not ever. The day wears on, and by evening you've warmed up enough to start noticing the finer details of life in this place. After a perfect stew and a slice of bread so dense it could double as a defensive weapon, you find yourself studying the sleeping chamber again. This time, your eyes linger on the pots themselves. They're not all the same, and it's impossible not to notice the little hierarchy they reveal. Your own is a simple ceramic piece, plain and undecorated, with a small chip along the rim across the room. However, one bed is flanked by something far more elaborate. A gleaming copper pot with brass fittings and an engraved handle, the kind of thing that practically shouts, "This belongs to someone important." In medieval society, even the most private items were subject to the same social divisions that shaped everything else. Wealthy households might have pots of pewter, silver, or even porcelain imported from distant lands. Servants and travelers had simpler versions, wooden, clay, or tin, functional but far from luxurious. And yes, there were accounts of nobles commissioning custom designs, floral patterns, coats of arms, and occasionally a whimsical animal-shaped handle for the fun of it. It's not just about material either. Size mattered. Larger pots were a mark of indulgence, allowing the user to avoid emptying it as frequently. Smaller ones were easier to carry, which meant they were often preferred by those who had to move around like soldiers and kept merchants on the road. That difference was subtle, but in a world where social rank dictated your tableware, clothing, and even your seating arrangement at church, it's no surprise your chamber pot made the list. Historians still debate whether people openly flaunted their nighttime luxuries, or if the whole thing was kept discreet. Some surviving examples from museum collections are plain to the point of anonymity. Others are so ornate you wonder if their owners ever used them at all. There's a theory, half practical, half humorous, that the fanciest pots were more for display than actual function. After all, it's hard to imagine willingly soiling something with silver filigree. As you ready yourself for bed again, you notice how everyone seems to know exactly where theirs is placed. No one moves anyone else's. No one swaps them by accident. The unspoken ownership is clear. And when the candles are snuffed out and the room drifts into darkness, you realize you're not just learning about medieval hygiene, you're getting a crash course in a silent, intricate social code that played out in the dim hours between dusk and dawn. The fire downstairs burns lower tonight, leaving the air in your chamber a touch colder, the kind that makes your breath visible if you lean toward the window. You shuffle under the blankets, eyes adjusting to the soft orange glow from the single candle still flickering near the door. That's when you start thinking about where exactly your chamber pot sits and why that location isn't random at all. In some households, there was a so-called proper side for it, often dictated by habit or tradition. You've heard it said the left side of the bed was considered correct, because most people are right-handed, and the right hand was kept clean for social gestures like shaking hands, eating bread, or blessing yourself before meals. Others argue it depended on the layout of the room, placing the pot closest to a wall or corner to reduce the risk of someone tripping over it. And yes, historians are still debating this. You'd think it would be a simple matter, but apparently even chamber pot placement can spark academic arguments. Tonight, you decide to test the theory. You reach down and slide the pot a little closer to the wall, half out of curiosity, half to see if it feels more correct. Almost instantly, you realize there's logic in the positioning. If it's too far under the bed, you risk fumbling in the dark and knocking it over too close to the edge, and someone passing might kick it accidentally. There's a delicate balancing of distance to be accessible, but tucked away just enough to be safe. In grander homes, there might be a designated stand or small wooden cabinet for the pot, sometimes even with a hinged lid. In humbler spaces like this it's a matter of finding the least inconvenient spot in a crowded room. You glance around and see that, without speaking, everyone seems to have adopted their own personal safe zone for theirs. No one needs to mark it, you simply know where yours lies. There's also an unspoken rule about checking the pot before you use it, especially if it's been sitting all day. You give it a quick glance earlier in the evening, not because you expect anything unpleasant, but because medieval life had a way of surprising you. Cats, mice, and even curious children could be unpredictable visitors, and the last thing you want is to find one investigating your private property. You settle back under the covers, oddly comforted by the knowledge that even something as mundane as this has its own logic, rules, and, dare you say, a touch of elegance. It's not glamorous, but it works, and in the middle of a cold medieval night, that's all you really need. That inn is busier tonight. A group of traveling merchants has arrived, their voices carrying up the stairwell along with the smell of damp cloaks and road dust. You're sharing the chamber with more people than before, which means the night's quiet rituals will need even more coordination. In a room like this, shared resources mean shared rules. The chamber pot is no exception. When several guests are assigned to one pot, common in cheaper lodgings, order of use is strictly first come, first served. If you're awake and need it, you quietly signal your intent with a soft scrape of wood on floor as you pull it toward you. Those already half asleep will know to wait their turn. There's no official timer, but the pace is brisk. No lingering, no small talk. You return it to its exact spot when you're done, handle facing outward for the next person. And if it's late in the night, and someone stirs from the far side of the room, they might murmur a single word mind before crossing over, just to avoid misunderstandings. It's a fascinating dance of courtesy. No one teaches you these rules outright. You pick them up through observation, like learning when to speak in a monastery, or how to pass dishes at a noble's table. Some chroniclers claim this etiquette was passed down in families, while others think it was a universal language born from necessity. Historians still argue which is true, though they agree that breaking the code was a fast way to become the talk of breakfast and not in a flattering way. The merchants tonight follow the script perfectly. One man rises, uses the pot with the efficiency of someone who's done this 100 times, and returns it without a sound. Another shifts in his blankets, waits patiently until the first settles back into bed, then takes his turn. There's no eye contact, no acknowledgement, as if the exchange never happened. Privacy, in this context, is maintained by collective silence. You, being newer to this rhythm, find yourself hyper-aware of every creak and shuffle, but you also start to appreciate the system. In a world where there's no running water, where stepping outside could mean frostbite or worse, this quiet order is what keeps the night running smoothly. It's unglamorous, uncelebrated, and yet absolutely vital, one of those small, invisible structures that hold daily life together. When you finally drift off, the muffled sound of boots being tried by the fire below fades into the background, replaced by the soft, steady breathing of a room full of strangers who somehow manage to coexist in near perfect, if slightly awkward, harmony. The wind is sharp tonight, rattling the shutters and seeping through every tiny gap in the stone walls. You can almost feel it brushing against your skin even under the blankets. A constant reminder that winter here isn't something to be taken lightly. It's exactly the kind of night that explains why the chamber pot was more than just a convenient seat, was a survival tool. You've already heard stories from other travelers about the dangers of venturing outside after dark in the cold months. Hypothermia was the obvious risk, but it wasn't the only one. There were icy steps waiting to trip you, stray dogs or opportunistic thieves lurking in alleyways, and the occasional less than friendly guard who questioned why you were wandering around in your night clothes. A quick trip to the courtyard could turn into an ordeal. That chamber pot, humble as it is, solved all of that. In places where the snow drifted high against the door, or where the river wind could cut through layers of wool, the pot became your indoor lifeline. You could stay warm, avoid the hazards outside, and get back to sleep without fully waking your body up. And in a society where daylight hours were precious for work, preserving your rest was a serious matter. Even in better-off households, the pot was essential during long winter nights. Servants would often place them discreetly under beds in guest rooms, ensuring no one had to climb down icy staircases in the dark. In less affluent settings like roadside inns, sharing a pot was simply more practical than sending each guest out into the freezing night one by one. There's a saying you overhear from a grizzled merchant by the fire earlier that evening: a warm bed, a full belly, and a pot within reach, that's winter luxury. He says it with a chuckle, but you can tell he means it. It's the kind of truth that transcends centuries. Historians still debate how often people used chamber pots in warmer months, or if they were strictly a cold weather necessity. The evidence is mixed. Some records suggest they were year-round companions. Others imply they were set aside when gardens, courtyards, or privies were easier to reach. Either way, on nights like this, the choice seems obvious. You curl deeper into your blankets, the ceramic pot sitting quietly in a spot by the bed. Outside, the wind whistles through the eaves, but you're safe, warm, and not even slightly tempted to put on boots. By now, you've gotten used to the plain, workmanlike pot that sits by your bed. So when you get a rare invitation to stay a night in the upper chambers of a noble household, you're not expecting to be surprised. And then you see it. The chamber pot here is nothing like the ones at the inn. It's polished to a mirror shine, made of gleaming pewter with a delicate floral pattern etched around the rim. The handle curves like a swan's neck, and there's even a fitted lid, something you've only heard about in passing. The thing looks more like a decorative trophy than a functional item. In the royal courts and noble estates of the Middle Ages, chamber pots could be surprisingly elaborate. Some were lined with copper to make cleaning easier, others with imported porcelain for the sheer luxury of it. There are even surviving accounts of gold or silver-plated pots, which historians suspect were more ceremonial than practical. After all, no one wants to explain to a goldsmith exactly how their work of art is being used. You imagine the awkward conversation between a noble and a craftsman. Could you have more engraving around the base? Of course. My lord, may I ask why? Let's just say it will be appreciated in private. The thing is, these ornate pieces weren't just for show within the household. In some cases, they were displayed subtly, but deliberately when guests visited, much like fine tableware or a particularly grand tapestry. The pot was another way to signal wealth and refinement, even if the subject was never directly addressed. Historians are still divided on whether these grand designs were actually used or simply kept as status symbols. Some argue that the presence of remarks suggests they saw practical service. Others believe they were ceremonial, brought out to impress guests but swapped for a plainer pot in daily life. You run your hand over the cool metal, feeling the engraved vines and tiny flowers beneath your fingertips. It's absurd, really, this much artistry for something so mundane, and yet it fits perfectly into the medieval mindset. Everything, no matter how private, could be a reflection of status. As the night draws in, and you settle into the enormous bed with its heavy velvet curtains, you can't help thinking, if this is the kind of care they put into a chamber pot, you can only imagine the grandeur of the dining hall silverware. Morning comes slowly in a noble household. Servants move like shadows, stoking fires and opening shutters without making a sound. You're still half buried under blankets when you notice the chamber pot from last night is no longer by your bed. It hasn't magically vanished yet, it's just being collected. And here lies another quiet truth of medieval life. Someone had to clean it. The job often fell to the lowest ranked servants, apprentices, or, in monasteries, novices still earning their place. It wasn't glamorous work, no one bragged about it, but it was essential. A poorly maintained pot was more than unpleasant. It was a health hazard. The cleaning process was surprisingly methodical. First, the contents were discreetly emptied, sometimes into a dedicated pit, other times into larger waste containers that would be taken outside. Then the pot would be rinsed, often with hot water if available, and sometimes scrubbed with ash or sand to remove stains. Wealthier households might add herbs like rosemary or mint to mask lingering odors. Poorer ones made do with a quick rinse and the hope of fresh air doing the rest. There was etiquette for this, too, though it was more about respect than ceremony. You never, under any circumstances, inconvenience the person responsible for cleaning your pot. These were the people who could, quite literally, make your life more unpleasant if you annoyed them. One careless remark about taking too long might mean your pot was mysteriously delayed the next morning. Historians still debate whether the role of pot cleaner was formally assigned in all households or rotated among staff. In some records, it appears to have been a fixed duty. In others, it was treated as an unpleasant task shared among the lower ranks. What's clear is that the work required both discretion and stamina, and perhaps a stronger stomach than most. You pass one of the servants in the corridor, a young man carrying a stack of freshly polished pots with the ease of someone who's done it 1,000 times. He nods politely but says nothing. It strikes you that his quiet efficiency is as much a part of the household's smooth running as the cook's timing or the steward's ledgers. By the time you return to your chamber that evening, the pot is back in place, spotless and cool to the touch. It's a small detail, but in the intricate machinery of medieval life, even the smallest gears mattered. You're back on the road now, leaving the noble estate behind for the far less polished realities of travel. The caravan you've joined moves slowly across rutted dirt paths, wheels creaking, hoofs kicking up dust. Every stop is a chance to stretch, barter for supplies, and dice quietly attend to personal needs. Among the seasoned travelers, there's an unspoken piece of advice. Always bring your own chamber pot. It sounds excessive at first, but after a few days on the road, you understand why. Inns can be unpredictable. Sometimes there's no pot at all, or the one provided looks like it last saw proper cleaning during your grandparents' time. And out here, privacy is an even rarer commodity. Your fellow Calviners have all kinds of portable solutions. One merchant carries a small, lidded clay pot padded in straw inside a wooden box. A peddler from the coast uses a lightweight copper version that doubles as a cooking pot. In emergency, as a fact he shares with a proud grin that makes you decide never to borrow it. A veteran guard swears by a leather-lined wooden vessel, claiming it's quieter on cold nights. You decide not to ask for specifics. Historians still debate how common it was for travelers to own personal pots, since few have survived intact. Clay ones often broke, and wooden ones wore down. The evidence we have comes mostly from written accounts and an occasional find in shipwrecks or archaeological digs along trade routes. What's clear is that mobility and sanitation were often at odds, and carrying your own equipment solved at least part of the problem. You can't help but admire the practical ingenuity of it. In an age before indoor plumbing, these little containers meant the difference between a tolerable night and one spent shivering outside. searching for a sheltered corner. They were part of the invisible toolkit of survival, alongside spare shoes, dry tinder, and a sturdy cloak. That night, you find a quiet spot near the campfire, tucking your own modest clay pot beside your bedroll. The stars are bright, the wind is still, and the only sounds are the horses shifting in their sleep and the faint hiss of the fire. You feel oddly reassured, knowing your night's comfort is within arm's reach. Travel eventually gives way to stillness, and you find yourself spending a few nights in a stone monastery perched on a hill. The bells mark the hours, the corridors smell faintly of beeswax and incense, and the rhythm of life here is so precise, it almost feels like the building itself breathes in time with the monks. The sleeping arrangements are simple: narrow wooden beds, coarse blankets, and at the foot of each bed a modest, unadorned chamber pot. You notice immediately that they're identical, each one plain ceramic with a small handle and no decoration whatsoever. Here, there's no room for vanity. Everything exists for function, not show. But the rules, the rules are stricter than anywhere you've been. The monks use their pots only at designated times, often just before the final prayers of the evening, or in the quiet moments before dawn. There's a collective cleaning period in the early morning, when novices carry the pots in careful lines to be emptied and scrubbed. No one speaks during this task. The silence is as much a part of the process as the work itself. Breaking the routine isn't taken lightly. You overhear that repeated off-schedule use could lead to penance, extra chores, fasting, or copying scripture for hours by candlelight. It's not about punishment in the usual sense, but about discipline. The chamber pot here is part of a larger rhythm, a small gear in the clockwork of monastic life. Historians still debate whether all monasteries enforce such strict regulation, or if it was unique to certain orders. Some argue it was about maintaining cleanliness. Others believe it was an exercise in self-control, a way of teaching monks to regulate even their most basic needs. That night, as the chanting fades and the lamps are extinguished one by one, you lie in bed aware of the pot's quiet presence at your feet. It's strange to think that something so humble could be bound up with ideas of discipline and devotion. Outside, the wind brushes against the stone walls. Inside, you can hear the faint creak of the floorboards as the novices begin their early rounds. Everything here moves with intention, even the things no one talks about. Morning in the monastery comes with a pale wash of light over the stone walls, and the sound of feet moving in soft unison. Today, you've been given a task you didn't exactly volunteer for: emptying a chamber pot. The assignment is handed to you without ceremony. A novice simply gestures to the pot at the foot of your bed and points toward a narrow doorway at the far end of the hall. You lift it carefully, steady grip, no sudden movements. There's an art to walking without letting the contents slosh, and you learn it fast. The designated disposal area is a small, walled courtyard with a drainage channel that runs toward the gardens. One by one, other novices tip their pots in, rinse them with a ladle of water drawn from a covered barrel, and give them a quick scrub with coarse sand. The process is quick, efficient, and done without a single word exchanged. The rule here is simple: be discreet. The task isn't shameful, but it isn't discussed either. You do the work, you keep it tidy, and you move on. Breaking that unspoken pact by being careless or drawing attention would earn you a disapproving look from the prior that could chill you more than the morning wind. Some historians think this quiet handling was part of a larger medieval attitude towards such matters: practical, unembarrassed, but never public. Others argued that the silence around it had religious undertones, tying into broader ideas of humility and service. No one can say for sure, but it's clear that the lack of fuss kept the task from becoming either a scandal or a joke. When it's your turn, you tip the pot carefully, the water catching a brief glint of morning sun before disappearing into the channel. You rinse, scrub, and set it aside to dry. The entire thing takes less than a minute, but you feel oddly aware of the centuries of hands, that have repeated this exact motion in this exact place. Walking back to your bed, you set the clean pot in its spot with the handle facing out, just as it was before. A small task, but it feels like you've passed an unspoken test on more step toward understanding the quiet systems that keep this world turning. The next leg of your journey takes you back into the realm of noisy ends and unpredictable mites. This time, the room is smaller, the bed's closer, and the floorboards creak with every step. It's the kind of place where accidents aren't just possible, they're inevitable. It happens sometime after midnight. A guest on the far side of the room, clearly half asleep, tries to navigate the narrow gap between beds to reach the pot. You hear the faint scrape of ceramic against wood, followed by a muffled thud, and then the unmistakable sound of something liquid hitting the floor. For a moment, everyone in the room freezes. In the medieval hierarchy of night disasters, a tipped chamber pot ranks just below a collapsed bed frame. Eyes open in the dark, but no one says a word. The poor soul responsible mutters a string of apologies, scrambling to right the pot and mop up what they can with a scrap of linen. There's no anger, no shouting, just an unspoken understanding that this could have happened to anyone. Still, the quiet tension lingers until morning, when the innkeeper's assistant comes in to scrub the floor. It's handled matter-of-factly, but you notice the other guests getting the spot a wide berth for the rest of the day. Historians still debate whether medieval inns kept extra pots on hand for just such mishaps. Some records suggest they did, while others imply that guests were expected to make do. Either way, accidents like this were part of life in close quarters, and the etiquette was to minimize the embarrassment. No teasing, no gossip, just a shared pact of selective memory. Later, you overhear one merchant quietly advising another to always keep the pot on the same side of the bed, so you can find it with your eyes closed. You can't help but think that's advice worth taking. Tonight, when you place yours by the bed, you make sure it's exactly where your hand will fall without hesitation. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters again, but inside the room, there's a new level of caution in every step. Everyone seems just a little more aware of where their pot is, and of how quickly a night can get complicated. By now, you've seen chamber pots in every condition plane. Ornate, chipped, polished, and you've started to notice that for some people, they're more than just tools. They're statements. At a bustling market town, where you've stopped for a few days, you rent a small room above a cooper's shop. The first thing you spot is your host's chamber pot, glazed in deep cobalt blue, with painted ivy leaves curling around its sides. It's clearly being cared for, the kind of object someone might show off to visiting friend's house. In this case, showing off means casually leaving it where guests can't see it. Among the wealthier classes, a decorated pot could be a subtle way of broadcasting taste and prosperity, just as embroidered bed linens or imported spices on the dining table said something about the household. So did a pot that was nicer than strictly necessary. Some were made by skilled potters who treated them as legitimate works of craft, adding intricate patterns, stamped motifs, or even gold edging. Of course, historians still argue whether people actually bragged about these. There's little direct evidence of someone saying, "Come see my beautiful chamber pot," but the sheer effort put into some surviving examples suggests pride of ownership was very real. One theory even suggests that, in certain households, gifting a finely made pot was a sign of favor or respect, much like giving a silver goblet. In the market today, you see stalls selling brand new ones, simple clay models for farm workers, plain tin for traveling merchants, and a few extravagantly painted ones for those who want to make a point. You watch as a woman hackles fiercely over a pot with a delicate floral bed, the way someone else might bargain for a piece of jewelry. That evening, as you settle into your room, you run your fingers over the ivy leaves on your host's pot. It's cool, smooth, and surprisingly pleasant to look at. Functional, yes, but also a quiet reminder that even the most private parts of life can't quite escape the pull of style and status. A few days later, your travels take you to a farming village, where the air smells faintly of damp earth and wood smoke. The houses are simple, with low ceilings and thick thatch roofs, and nearly every yard has a small vegetable plot or herb garden. It's here you learn another side to the chamber pot's story, one that takes its usefulness beyond the bedroom. After breakfast, your host picks up the family's chamber pot, not to clean it in the usual way, but to carry it straight to the garden. Without fanfare, they pour the contents into a covered pit near the compost heap. You watch as they stir the mixture with a long-handled paddle, adding kitchen scraps and straw. It makes the soil richer, your host explains matter-of-factly, as though it's the most natural thing in the world. Human waste, it turns out, was often repurposed in agriculture. In rural communities where every resource counted, nothing was wasted if it could serve a purpose. Mixed with ash, straw, or other organic matter, the contents of a chamber pot could be transformed into fertilizer for crops. It wasn't a daily practice in every household, but it was far from rare. Historians still debate how widespread this waste-to-field system was, since written records on such a topic are understandably scarce. Some point to agricultural manuals that hinted its use. Others suggest it was more of a regional habit, tied to soil conditions and available resources. What's certain is that in places where the ground was poor, adding nutrients from any source could make a big difference in harvest yields. You can't help but marvel at the practicality of it. The same object that offered comfort on a cold night could also help feed the household months later. It's a closed loop, medieval stylion that's far removed from modern plumbing, but rooted in a logic that still makes sense. That night, as you prepare for bed, you look at the pot by your feet with new eyes. It's not just part of the night's routine, it's part of the land's cycle, quietly linking the most private corners of life with the fields that keep the village alive. Your journey eventually brings you to a growing market city, a place buzzing with traders, craftsmen, and the faint hum of change in the air. Here, you notice something different, not in the streets or the stalls, but in the rooms where you stay. The chamber pots are disappearing. In the finer inns, you're shown to a room with an actual enclosed privy built into the wall, connected to a vertical shaft that runs down to a waste pit below. In wealthier homes, you hear talk of pipes carrying water, though the system is rudimentary at best. It's not universal, far from it, but it's a glimpse into the slow shift away from the old ways. Some residents still keep chamber pots for convenience, especially at night, but they're no longer the unquestioned necessity they once were. You find one tucked neatly in a cabinet in your lodging, almost as if it's there just in case, rather than as a nightly companion. The innkeeper even laughs when you ask about it, saying, "We have a proper privy now, but some guests still like the old habits." Historians still debate exactly when chamber pots began their steady decline. Some say it was tied to advances in urban sanitation. Others believe it was cultural, part of a shift toward different standards of privacy and comfort. Whatever the cause, you can feel the change, or rather sense that the quiet rules you've been living by are starting to fade from daily life. That night, lying in a bed with soft linens and a privy just down the hall, you can't help feeling a little nostalgic. There was something oddly reassuring about the routine, knowing exactly where your pot Saturday, respecting the unspoken etiquette, and being part of a tradition that stretched back centuries. You glance toward the cabinet one last time before drifting off. The ceramic vessel sits inside, spotless, silent, and tonight unused. The wind outside carries the scent of the river through the open shutters, and for the first time in weeks, you fall asleep without the soft weight of a pot weighing at your feet. The fire in your imagined inn has long since burned down to embers, and the room is wrapped in a gentle, velvety quiet. You've traveled far through cold stone rooms, crowded inns, noble chambers, and quiet monasteries, following the humble chamber pot through centuries of whispered rules and unspoken agreements. Now, those rules have faded into the stillness of the night, like ripples disappearing into a calm pond. You're no longer thinking about etiquette or placement, or even the weight of the ceramic in your hands. The details have softened into something warm and distant, the way memories blur when they're ready to let you drift away. Your breathing slows outside. The wind moves lazily through the eaves, and the walls hold the last traces of the day's warmth. It's easy to imagine the centuries folding in on themselves, all those quiet winter nights layered together into one long, peaceful moment. Somewhere in that stack of time, you found your place safe, unhurried, and entirely your own. Let your eyes close. Let the stories settle into the background, and allow sleep to carry you as gently as a candle flame leaning into the dark.